In the endless night of the 41st millennium, where even faith burns to ash, a light descends, fierce, pure, and alien. He calls himself Goku, a warrior from beyond the stars, whose very presence bends the laws of reality. To mortals, he is salvation. To the Inquisition, he is a threat. And to the warp, he is the perfect vessel. For no soul, no matter how pure, remains untouched forever. This is the story of how Goku, the Saiyan who defied gods, was broken by chaos, not through battle, but through belief. If you find yourself drawn into the void, into tales where impossible legends meet the grimdark, heart of the Imperium, then lend strength to this archive. Like the Chronicle, share the truth, and subscribe to the channel. Every act of faith keeps the machine spirit alive, and ensures that the galaxy remembers. The air burned that night, not with the usual industrial haze of the hive stacks, but with something older, something divine or damned. No one could tell. I remember standing among the ruins of the upper manufactorum, the steel trembling beneath my boots as the heavens screamed. The storm split open like a wound, and from its heart fell a shape that defied reason, a comet of living fire. It tore through the atmosphere with a sound that wasn't thunder but something closer to a scream, like reality itself protesting what was coming. The impact shook Viaris 9 to its core. Towers crumbled. Vox lines went dead. Even the servitors stopped, mid-task, as if the machine spirit itself held its breath. When the dust cleared, there was silence, a silence so heavy it felt alive. And then light, not from the sun, nor from any forge flame, but from the crater itself. I saw him then, a man, or something like one, standing amid molten earth. His skin bore no scars, no augmentations. His body radiated an energy I could feel on my tongue, sharp, metallic, alive. His eyes, Emperor, forgive me, his eyes shone like twin suns, calm yet endless. The skittery around me fell to their knees, their mechanical voices stuttering prayers through broken Vox grills. One of them managed to transmit a final log before his circuits burned out. A star walks among men. At first, we believed it was a miracle. The ecclesiarchy declared it a sign. A celestial saint returned to purge corruption from the hive. The Margos of the Forge temples called it an anomaly of the warp, an energy being drawn through the void by the Emperor's will. But the Astra Militarum units stationed nearby, they saw something else. They saw a threat. They encircled the crater in minutes, tanks rumbling across scorched ground, lasguns primed and shaking in mortal hands. Yet none dared fire. Not when that figure turned his gaze upon them, not when the very air hummed with power. He did not speak at first. He merely looked up past the clouds, as if searching for something beyond even the stars. And then the ground trembled again. A low, rhythmic pulse, faint at first, then louder, heavier, until even the manufactorum walls cracked beneath the vibration. That's when the whispers began. Faint echoes in the Vox, unholy frequencies twisting through static. The tech priests called it interference, but those of us who heard it knew better. It wasn't machine noise. It was hunger. The warp had felt him. Demons, not of flesh, not of form, but of intent, stirred in the unseen dark. The air thickened, the taste of ozone turning to blood. And from the shadows between worlds came the first breach. I saw the sky ripple like water, and out of it poured the impossible shapes that bled reality as they emerged. They had no eyes, yet I felt their gaze. no mouths, yet I heard their laughter echo through my skull. The guardsmen opened fire. Bolts, plasma, loss, all of it cut through the night like a desperate hymn. But it wasn't enough. Their rounds passed through the demons as if through smoke, each impact only feeding their frenzy. And through it all, the being in the crater, the one we would later call the star that should not be moved. He raised a single hand. The motion was almost gentle. The ground split open as blue-white energy erupted outward, brighter than any plasma coil, purer than any promethium flame. The demons screamed as their forms disintegrated, their essence ripped apart by something that wasn't psychic. It was life, raw, untamed, defiant. The world seemed to hold still after that. I remember the smell, burnt ozone, scorched metal, and something sweet beneath it, like the air after a storm. The man, the being, stood unmoved. His aura dimmed, fading from blinding light to a faint, steady glow. Around him, the dead lay silent. Machines flickered back to life, the imperial Aquila on their hulls, scorched but unbroken, and yet, even as the soldiers fell to their knees in awe, I felt something deeper than wonder, fear, because in that radiant glow was something the Imperium could not name, a power outside its faith, beyond its understanding, a star walking among men, but not one born of the Emperor's light. Far above, the warp rippled again, not in retreat, but in recognition. Something vast and unseen had noticed, something ancient. The demons that had come were not an invasion. They were scouts, and the man in the crater, he was looking back at the sky, as if he knew. They began to call him the kind God. It started as a whisper among the refugees hiding beneath the fractured habitures of Viharis 9, a name spoken not out of rebellion, but reverence. The kind God of flesh and flame, they said, and even the dying smiled when they heard it. I remember the first time I saw him up close, his bare feet against the ash, his eyes watching a child breathe again after weeks of fever. His touch glowed faintly, a warmth that sank through the skin and into the bones. Not the searing burn of promethium fire, but the kind of warmth you forget exists in this age. The warmth of a sunrise you'll never see again. He didn't understand what we were, didn't understand what his kindness meant here. The Imperium had long forgotten mercy. It had no place in our creed, and yet this man, this being, gave it freely. He moved through the lower hive like a ghost of light, carrying the wounded on his shoulders, fixing broken pipes with his bare hands as if metal itself obeyed him. His aura lingered long after he passed, the air thick with ozone and something almost floral, like purity made scent. Children followed him through the ruins, their laughter rising over the hum of dying generators. For the first time in centuries, the hive sounded alive, but where the people saw a savior, the priests saw blasphemy. The ecclesiarchy ordered sermons, denouncing him as a false saint, a warp-born trick meant to test the faith of the Imperium. Yet even their words trembled with doubt. How could they condemn the one who healed the sick, who made the blind see, who faced horrors from the depths of the warp without fear or weapon? I saw an old confessor tear the imperial Aquila from his robe, kneel in the dust, and whisper, "If this be heresy, then I choose damnation." Goku, as the machine logs named him, did not understand the language of faith or fear. When the priests begged him to cease, he smiled and said, "If people suffer, I'll help." He said it so simply, like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. No divine command, no prayer, just truth. But truth in the Imperium is never simple. His mercy was a weapon sharper than any chain blade, one that cut through the rituals holding our world together. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it anomaly. The Ecclesiarchy called it sin. I called it hope. And hope is what kills you first in the dark. Every act of healing, every flash of golden key sent ripples through the image. The psychers began to scream in their sleep, their eyes weeping blood. The astropaths went blind, whispering of a light that blinds the soul. The warp was listening, feeding, twisting his compassion into something it could taste. Some said they saw shadows moving behind him, shapes that didn't belong to the world of men. At night, dreams turned strange. The people spoke of a fire that whispered secrets, a gentle voice that promised peace without pain, life without death. A god without chains. I began hearing it too. A whisper beneath the hum of the high vengeance. It wasn't words, more like warmth pressing against my thoughts, patient, inviting. When I woke, my palms burned faintly, as if they'd been marked by unseen flame. Around me, the faithful built shrines of scrap and bone, each marked with a crude sun symbol, their own imitation of the astral. They prayed not to the emperor, but to the star. Their hymns replaced the familiar litanies with something new, something softer. They no longer asked for deliverance. They believed they already had it, and that belief bled into the warp like a wound. Reality itself began to crack. I saw walls shimmer as if underwater. Servitors twitched, muttering prayers that weren't in any data script. The smell of ozone deepened, turning sweet, intoxicating. The air grew heavy, shimmering gold under dim lumen lights. And through that haze, I saw things that made no sense. Demons kneeling, their forms trembling, unable to touch the light that emanated from him. They didn't flee in terror, they worshipped. He didn't notice. He didn't see the danger of love in a world like this. To him, every life was worth saving. To the warp, every emotion was a feast. And as his key burned brighter, the boundary between light and hunger thinned. People dreamed of paradise, of a golden figure walking across the void, offering peace to demon and man alike. They called it prophecy. The priests called it madness. I called it the beginning of the end. For on the seventh night, when all of Via glowed faintly under a false dawn, the dreams changed. The fire in them spoke, and this time it gave itself a name. Not Goku, not saint, not savior, but God. The fifth God, and from somewhere far beyond the veil, something answered. It began as beauty. That was the lie of it. The first signs were miracles, tiny, fragile things that made even the most jaded of us pause. Grass growing through steel grating, rust turning to glimmering gold dust, the wounded whose flesh healed not with scars, but with light. When Goku passed, the world seemed to breathe again. The air carried warmth instead of smog. The taste of iron gave way to sweetness, like rain after a dust storm. And for a brief, terrible moment, we believed the nightmare might finally end. But light has its own shadow. The faithful began to change. At first it was subtle, a glow beneath the skin, a faint shimmer that danced across their eyes. They said it was the star's blessing, proof that the Emperor had not forgotten them. But the more they prayed, the brighter they burned. I saw a mother cradle her child, both of them radiant as twin suns, until their skin began to crack, light leaking from the wounds as if their souls were trying to escape. They didn't scream. They smiled, The Imperial Guard moved swiftly after that. Purge protocols. Cleansing fire. The sound of promethium burners filled the night, a chorus of righteous flame swallowing the laughter of the faithful. I can still smell it. Burning flesh, ozone, incense. The sermons turned from praise to accusation, the priests screaming mutation through smoke-thick air. But how do you burn faith? How do you kill an idea that glows brighter each time you strike it? Through it all, Goku refused to fight them. He stood among the chaos, bare-chested and calm, eyes like dying suns, not with anger, but sorrow. He raised no hand against the guard, no word of defiance against the ecclesiarchy. When they fired, the rounds disintegrated mid-air, dissolving in the heat of his aura. He could have leveled the entire hive with a single blow, yet he only said, "They don't understand." And then he healed the very soldiers sent to kill him. His mercy was a wound the Imperium could not cauterize. The ecclesiarchy named him Anomaly Sigma Prime, a heretical aberration to be erased. VOX orders crackled across the planet. Prepare for extermination-level cleansing. The skies filled with flame. Dropships descended, black against a false dawn. And yet, even as war erupted below, something else moved above. I could feel it before I saw it, a pressure behind my eyes, a taste of copper and ice in the back of my throat. The warp watched. Not with rage, not with hunger, but with curiosity. It was as if chaos itself leaned closer to the light, whispering to see what it might become. For eons, the gods had fed on despair, hatred, lust, decay, but this was new. A soul burning so bright it threatened to unmake them, or worse, to change them. There were whispers among the psychers before they went mad. They claimed the immaterium rippled with unfamiliar hymns, echoes of a fifth power, unformed but growing. They spoke of a God, not of corruption, but of compassion twisted too far, of light that refused to fade until it consumed itself. The cult of the star embraced it. Their chants shifted, no longer prayers for salvation, but calls. Calls for something to come through, and something did. It began as a vibration in the air, deep and resonant, like the hum of the Astronomicon, distorted by grief. The ground shook, machinery screamed, and across the hive, the faithful fell to their knees as one. Their eyes turned skyward, and for the first time since the comet's arrival, the heavens opened again. But this was no radiant fall, it was rupture. A gash torn across the night, bleeding light and shadow in equal measure. The demons that emerged were unlike any before, neither claw nor corruption. They shimmered, refracted, half-formed things, their faces angelic one moment, monstrous the next. They didn't roar, they sang. Their voices were gentle, coaxing, almost mournful, as if they pitied us. I watched as one brushed a dying soldier's cheek, turning him to dust made of light. It was beautiful. It was horrifying, and through that bleeding sky I felt it, something vast, stirring, ancient and endless, patient as a star's death. The warp was answering the call, but not as predator this time. As mirror.goku stood beneath the glow, silent, watching as heaven and hell merged above him. His face was unreadable, not fear, not joy, just quiet understanding, as if he knew what was happening, as if he'd known all along. And in that moment, the light began to bleed back, not into the warp, but into him at first. He mistook them for memories. In the aftermath of battle, when the ground still smoked and the air reeked of promethium and scorched blood, Goku would close his eyes and hear them. Voices soft as breath, fragile as glass. They spoke his name like a prayer, each one carrying a note of longing that pierced through the din of this broken galaxy. He thought it was the echo of his past, friends lost, faces remembered, laughter buried beneath centuries of war. But these voices did not fade. They grew clearer, warmer, too vivid to be mere recollection. And beneath their tenderness was something wrong. A rhythm that pulsed in time with the warp itself. The first time he realized they weren't memories. He was standing amidst the wreckage of a manufactorum, his hands still glowing from battle. The demons had fallen, their ichor staining the steel, and the survivors gathered in reverent silence. Then the whisper came again, not through air, not through vox or soul, but from inside. "You are not alone," it said, in a tone that was almost human. He felt it slide through his mind like silk and static, carrying both comfort and corrosion. He tried to ignore it. He meditated in the ruins, listening to the hum of the dying generators, the metallic drip of molten slag, the faint hiss of cooling armor. Yet the voices followed. Each time he drew breath, they breathed with him. Each time he raised his key, they stirred like embers fanned by wind. They spoke of kindness, of mercy, of what he could become, a savior not bound by creed or emperor, a light untouched by the chains of faith. But woven between their words was something darker, a craving that tasted like rust and honey. The Imperials began to notice his silence. The soldiers who once followed him into battle now kept their distance, whispering litanies beneath their breath. They said the air around him shimmered wrong, that his glow flickered crimson at the edges, that his shadow sometimes moved when he didn't. Even the who feared nothing short of death, recorded fluctuations in reality wherever he walked. Their machine spirits called it resonance, a harmonic interference between matter and meaning. The priests had another word, possession, but Goku did not rage. He fought, as he always did, against demons that clawed through fractured air, against the creeping infection of despair. Every blow he struck tore rifts wider. Every burst of energy sent waves through the immaterium. The warp answered like a chorus, matching his rhythm, harmonizing with his very soul. It was no longer resisting him. It was listening. Then came the night of the seventh battle. The field was littered with broken armor and shattered equipment. He knelt among the fallen, his ki dimming to a faint, wounded glow. And that's when the whispers changed. They no longer spoke in fragments. They sang. Thousands of voices, layered and rising, each tone perfectly familiar yet impossibly alien. They spoke in the tongues of worlds he had never seen, names he had never heard. Yet he understood every word. "You are what they made you," they said. "A God of mercy in a universe that worships pain. But mercy cannot exist without faith. And faith cannot exist without worship." The words cut through him like light through glass. He wanted to reject them, but the truth of it ached. He had seen the Imperium's faith, built on fear and flame. He had seen mortals kneel not in love, but in terror. And now they knelt to him. Was it wrong to give them hope, even if that hope defied their gods? His aura flared gold, brilliant, trembling. The very air trembled with it. Vox signals died across the front lines, and every servitor in 1,000 meters screamed in binary prayer. For a heartbeat, all of VOX saw it. The sky split with light. His body outlined against the burning clouds like a new sun. But his eyes burned red. The psychers collapsed, clutching their skulls. babbling of music in the void of something vast and luminous forming shape beyond the veil. A name spoken by angels and demons alike. The soldiers called it madness. The priests called it prophecy. And deep within that storm of light, Goku stood unmoving, the voices still whispering through him, gentle and relentless. When he finally spoke, his words were barely a breath. "I am not your God." But the warp did not listen. It only answered with laughter, soft as rain, echoing through every soul that still dared to believe. And somewhere beyond the veil, a new voice stirred, one that did not whisper, one that waited. The voices no longer came in fragments. They had grown into something whole, patient, persuasive, terrifyingly human. When Goku closed his eyes, they stood before him as memories wearing faces he trusted. Old friends, teachers, people he had loved in another universe, long buried by time. They spoke not as tormentors, but as confidants, whispering in the language of his compassion. "You suffer because you care," they said. "You fight endless wars for mortals who cannot save themselves. What if mercy was not sacrifice? What if mercy was power?" He wanted to silence them. He tried. But the words sank into his thoughts like roots through soil, coiling around his conscience until he could no longer tell where their logic ended and his doubt began. Every battlefield he crossed became another sermon in their favor. He saw imperial soldiers burn cities in the emperor's name, purging the sick and the broken with flame and prayer. He watched Kamisas shoot kneeling refugees who refused to praise a god they'd never seen. And through it all, the voices asked softly, "Are they free, Goku? Is this what salvation looks like?" The war on Via Resnine had become a graveyard of contradictions. Every act of kindness he gave was met with suspicion. Every life he spared became fuel for heresy. He saved a child from the pyres, only to watch her executed by the ecclesiarchy an hour later for being touched by his light. When he questioned them, the priests called it blasphemy. When he defended them, they called it rebellion. The galaxy, it seemed, could not survive without cruelty that night. Standing amid the ruins of Hive V Horus Delta, he heard the voices, again clearer now, closer. The stars above shimmered unnaturally, as if watching. The air carried the metallic scent of burnt ceramite and blood. And from within the hum of the warp, he heard it. Not temptation, not command, but understanding. "You were never meant to follow their laws," the voice said. "You are the law. You were never meant to heal their wounds. You were meant to end their suffering." He clenched his fists, the earth trembling beneath his feet. "By killing them," he murmured, "by deciding who deserves to live." The reply came soft as breath. "By ending the need to choose." And in that moment, the ground split. The corrupted horde had returned demons twisted from the flesh of fallen soldiers, their forms shimmering with warp light. They came not as an army, but as worshippers, crawling through the molten dust with reverence. Their voices merged into a single chant, a hymn not of defiance, but devotion. They called his name not as plea, but praise. Something inside him broke. The restraint that had defined him, the control that separated fury from judgment, it slipped. His ki flared in response, golden light twisting to crimson as it collided with the psychic weight of the warp. The heat scalded the sky. The ground liquefied beneath his feet, steel and stone melting like wax. Demons screamed as their bodies vaporized, but their cries were not of pain. They sang through the fire. They exalted him even as they burned. When it ended, there was nothing left but glass and silence. The horizon shimmered red, painted by the reflection of his own aura still fading in the distance. He stood at the center of the crater, the smell of ozone heavy in his lungs, his skin glowing faintly like embers cooling after a storm. For the first time, he couldn't tell if he'd saved the world or ended it around him. The survivors of the Astra Militarum watched from the edges of the ruin, weapons lowered. None dared speak. Some dropped to their knees, clutching their Achilles, whispering prayers to the Emperor. Others whispered a different name. His dot the warp fell silent, almost reverent, yet in that quiet, he realized the most terrible truth of all. The voices were gone, but their message remained. He stared at his hands, at the faint glow still pulsing beneath his skin. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in the void, the rhythm of something vast stirring beyond the veil. And then, in the faintest corner of his mind, so soft it could have been, imagination, he heard it, not the warp, not the demons, himself, a single whisper, trembling, almost mournful. Maybe they were right. The wind on Virus 9 had changed. It no longer carried the dust of war or the scent of burned promethium. It carried him, faint, trembling, human voices echoing across the desolation, singing his name as if it were salvation. The flame that listens. The name spread like infection, whispered through vox grills, scrawled in blood across broken walls. At first, Goku thought it was madness, another cruel jest of the warp. But the faces of the faithful told another story. They wept as they prayed. They believed, and belief in this galaxy was a weapon stronger than any blade. He walked among them, cloaked in light that refused to die, though his body trembled under its weight. Every movement left traces of heat in the air, a shimmer that distorted the ruins around him. The soldiers who once fled from demons now knelt before him. Even the Inquisition's agents, veiled in their black sigils and suspicion, held their distance. To kill him now would mean martyrdom, and martyrdom was a contagion the Imperium could not afford. They called for guidance through their Vox channels, but no voice from Terra answered. Perhaps even the Golden Throne hesitated to judge what stood here. Gok, you felt their eyes, their fear, their worship, and with it came a quiet horror. This was not what he had fought for, not what he had ever wanted. He had seen gods rise and fall, had destroyed tyrants who demanded devotion, had promised himself he would never become one. Yet here he was, surrounded by those who looked to him not as a protector, but as the dawn of something greater, something forbidden. He turned his gaze upward. The sky was fractured, not merely by war, but by something deeper, veins of crimson light tearing through the void, leaking color that had no name. The warp pressed against reality like breath on glass, and within it he could feel them, not the demons, but the architects behind them, watching, waiting, smiling. It was not mockery. It was invitation. The warp did not tempt him with corruption anymore. It offered understanding. It whispered that his compassion had always been divine, that his rage was creation's echo, that he was not falling, he was ascending. And in that lie or truth, he felt an impossible serenity, because for the first time he could see the threads of every soul around him. The pain, the hope, the endless cycle of death in the Emperor's name. He could end it. He could unmake the cruelty that defined this age. But what would be left? He took a step forward, feeling the ground soften under his feet, the very earth reacting to his indecision. The light around him wavered, caught between gold and crimson. His heart beat like thunder. His mind, once a fortress, now felt like open air. And in that openness, something moved. Not a voice this time, not a whisper, but a smile. He could feel it stretching across the stars, ancient and knowing. The abyss was smiling. He saw its reflection in the eyes of the soldiers who watched him, not in fear, but in hope. Hope that he might be their new dawn. Hope that maybe this time the fire wouldn't burn them. Hope that maybe mercy had finally found its weapon. He wanted to speak, to tell them not to follow, not to believe. But his words died in his throat, swallowed by the air thick with worship. The moment his gaze met theirs, the chant began again, louder this time, rising like a storm. Flame that listens, flame that listens, and the warp listened back. The horizon bled open, spilling color that devoured the stars. The light poured toward him like a tide, merging with the aura that clung to his skin. His hair flickered, the gold dimming too deep, burning scarlet. His aura split into twin halos, one radiant, one shadowed. The air hummed with energy so dense it tasted like metal and lightning. He should have resisted. He wanted to, but the truth was, the line between resistance and surrender had long since vanished. Goku raised his eyes to the storm and for a fleeting moment smiled not in pride but in sorrow. Perhaps this was the price of mercy, to stand between gods and monsters until even you couldn't tell which one you were becoming. The stars blinked once, as if wincing. Then the light swallowed everything. There was no wind that morning, only the stillness of breath held by an entire world. Ash hung, suspended in the air like snow, glowing red in the reflected light of the storm above. The once holy spires of the Ecclesiarchy Cathedral, proud monuments to the Emperor's eternal dominion, now stood as skeletal silhouettes against a sky torn open by fire. Every stained glass window that had once depicted saints and martyrs now dripped molten glass. The faces of devotion melting into formless color, and at the heart of it all stood Goku, unmoving, unbound, unbearable to behold. His light pulsed like a dying star trying to remember what it meant to live. The ground trembled beneath him, though no tectonic force stirred. It was his heartbeat, steady, deliberate, echoing across the ruins in low, thunderous waves. Each pulse rippled through the air, bending metal, cracking stone, igniting corpses that had long since cooled. Around him, what remained of the faithful still crawled toward the glow, their flesh blistering, eyes wide with devotion that had long since crossed into madness. They didn't cry for salvation anymore. They cried for union, for the chance to become part of whatever he had become. The Astra Militarum's last platoons tried to hold the perimeter, but their lasguns faltered in their grip. Vox channels were choked with static and prayer. One by one, they dropped to their knees, not in surrender, but in awe. They had seen demons before. They had faced the horrors of the warp, the plagues of Nurgle, the lies of Tianch, the rage of Khorne. But this was something else. This was divinity raw, unfiltered, unchained. And for soldiers born into a faith that preached humanity's frailty, the sight of a man surpassing gods was not comfort. It was blasphemy. In orbit, inquisitorial vessels watched through Auspex feeds, each frame distorted by radiation bursts and warp interference. The readings were impossible, fluctuating between sanctified and demonic signatures, holy and heretical in the same breath. Some claimed to hear a voice through the static, deep and calm, whispering in a language older than terror itself. Others swore the voice was his. There is no enemy, it said. only balance, then silence, in the command deck of the Penance. Of dawn, Inquisitor Helene Varro stood before the viewing screen, hands trembling beneath her gloves. Anomaly Sigma Primaris, she whispered, the designation she herself had given him. Yet now, watching the world dissolve into radiance, she felt the weight of those words as confession. This was no anomaly. This was evolution, blooming in the heart of apocalypse. On the planet below, Goku opened his eyes. The pupils were gone, replaced by pure, blinding gold that reflected nothing, not even the fire consuming the world around him. His aura flared, peeling away the last remnants of mortal restraint. The ground cracked beneath his feet, exposing molten veins that pulsed with the same rhythm as his heart. The air was alive with whispers, not from the warp, but from the faithful burning in his presence. Each death fed the storm. Each scream became a note in the symphony of light spiraling outward, and yet his expression was serene. He did not look upon the dying with cruelty or pity, but with a sorrow that transcended both. To those who could still see through the radiance, his lips moved, but the words were not meant for them, perhaps not even for this universe. It was never supposed to be this way, he said softly. The sound carried no volume, yet it echoed across the world like prophecy. The light surged again, bright enough to burn through the void. On the bridge of the Inquisitorial flagship, alarms screamed as the planet's surface readings spiked beyond measurable limits. The Mechanicus Tech Adepts began chanting the litany of containment, their voices trembling as the Emperor's tarot cracked on the altar before them, cards splitting down the center, as if fate itself could no longer bear to be read. Then came the shift, sudden, silent, cataclysmic. The red glare of Via Harasnine deepened to crimson, the entire atmosphere igniting in a single planetary heartbeat. Every orbiting vessel saw it, the clouds parting, the surface blooming into impossible radiance. From the heavens, it looked like the planet itself had become a second sun, and within that sun stood a single figure outlined in light, not ascending, not falling, simply becoming. The Vox operators screamed as their systems overloaded. The last transmission from the planet cut through the chaos, a voice, faint, distorted, almost gentle. "Do not fear the end," it said. "It is only the beginning remembering itself." Then the feed went black. For a moment, the void was silent. Then the light from Viharis 9 reached the fleet, and every ship, every mind, every prayer was bathed in it. The bombardment began as a whisper, distant tremors rolling through the bones of the dying planet. From orbit, the Inquisition's fleet unleashed its verdict in silence. The ritual words of exterminators spoken not as commands, but as confessions. Orbital torpedoes fell like silver rain, their descent slicing through the atmosphere with trails of molten light. Each one carried the Emperor's wrath, each one promised cleansing flame. But on the surface of Viharis 9, nothing burned as it should have. Where the first torpedo struck, the explosion froze, mid-bloom, a sphere of fire suspended in defiance of physics. Light bent and folded into shapes the human mind could not bear. Within that impossible stillness, the air sang, a low hum at first, then a chorus, countless voices echoing the same tone, the same rhythm, the sound of energy remembering its origin. From that sound came form. They rose from the ashes like ghosts carved from sunlight, their bodies sculpted from the same key that had shattered the heavens. Some bore faces twisted by fury, others serene as saints, all of them radiant with a power that did not belong to this galaxy. Their movements were silent, their presence suffocating. They were not demons, nor angels, nor men. They were fragments, echoes of Goku's soul, splintered across the dying world. Each one carried a piece of him, his compassion, his wrath, his longing for peace, all fractured, all alive. The Astra Militarum squads that remained planetside tried to retreat, their chimera transports grinding over scorched metal and bodies alike. But the moment the soldiers raised their lasguns, the air rippled. One of the beings appeared before them, golden, faceless, and burning from within. The shots fired dissolved into harmless sparks before touching it. The creature didn't retaliate. It simply raised its hand, and the soldiers' weapons crumbled into dust. For a fleeting instant, the men felt warmth, not pain, as though forgiveness itself had touched them before their bodies turned to ash and joined the wind. From orbit, the fleet's augurs went blind. Every sensor, every cogitator, every servo skull screamed with corrupted readings. Some claimed to see multiple suns rising from the planet's surface. Others reported hearing voices through the VOX. Whispers speaking in perfect synchronization. He is not gone. Inquisitor Helene Varro watched from the bridge of the Penance of Dawn, her face bathed in crimson light. The Margos beside her recited binary litanies to stabilize the instruments, but even the machine spirits seemed to falter. "These are not demons," Helene whispered. "The warp rejects them." The Margos turned, mechanical eyes narrowing. "Then what are they?" Her answer came from the void below. Across the ruins of the Ecclesiarchy Cathedral, amid rivers of glass and molten faith, one of the fragments, taller than the rest, crowned in fire, stood motionless. Around it, others knelt, their energy pulsing in rhythm with its own. Slowly, the being raised its head toward the heavens, and the light around its body flared, painting the storm clouds gold. From its chest, a sound emerged, not a roar, not a scream, but something purer. A heartbeat, and as it echoed across the world, the bombardment faltered. The torpedoes still falling from orbit began to disintegrate mid-flight. Their machine spirits overwhelmed by something greater, not corrupted, not hacked, simply outshone. The Emperor's wrath met something that refused to die. And for the first time in the history of VRS-9, divine fire hesitated. In that moment, the planet changed, the soil glowed, the seas of blood shimmered into vapor. Statues melted, manufactorums cracked, and every corpse turned its face toward the sky. The fragments spread, drifting like embers carried by a breath too vast to comprehend. Some flew into the void. Others sank beneath the crust. Each one a seed, an echo of Goku's will, his mercy, his rage. The VOX recordings of those final moments were later classified as heretical, forbidden to all but the High Lords of Terror. But rumors persisted. Some claimed the saints of VRS-9 still wander the void, burning like comets, appearing in the wake of great wars to strike both chaos and imperial alike. Others say they are trapped between realities, a living scar where faith and defiance became one. Yet among all the testimonies, one line appears again and again, whispered by dying soldiers and fading servitors alike, a phrase carried across the static like prayer. He did not fall into chaos. Chaos fell into him, and somewhere in the silence between stars, something vast smiled, not in victory, but in understanding. The warp does not forget. It reshapes, replays, and reflects, and within its impossible tides, the memory of Goku lingered, like an echo refusing to die. To mortals, he had become a ghost story, a divine flame that flickered between reality and nightmare. But to the gods of chaos, he was something far worse, proof that perfection could be born from defiance, not devotion. Khorne's laughter died in his brass citadel when the Saiyan's image surfaced upon his blood. Mirrors a warrior who fought without anger, whose strikes bore no hate, only purpose. Slaanesh, who fed on excess, found only silence where desire should have sung. Even Nurgle's joyous decay recoiled, for this being's sorrow brought no rot, no rebirth, only stillness. And Tench the eternal schemer glimpsed something he could neither predict nor twist, a fate unbound by destiny itself. Some claim Goku had merged with the Astronomicon, that his essence now pulsed faintly within the Emperor's holy light, distorting the prayers of navigators who swore they heard laughter, soft, distant, unafraid. Others, the heretical few, believed he walked among the stars, not as flesh or soul, but as motion, a ripple of willpower threading through the warp's madness. They spoke of systems that awoke from millennia of silence, of worlds once lost to chaos suddenly purged clean, the air still shimmering with residual ki like sunlight through glass. The Inquisition burned those who spoke such words, but rumors, like light, cannot be chained. In the archives of the Ordo Malleus, a fragment survives, a Vox recording filled with static and whispers. It is said to come from the bridge of the Sanctus Solis. Moments before the ship vanished beyond the veil, a voice, trembling yet clear, utters a single phrase. He smiled at us. No coordinates, no screams, only that the Magi, biologists who studied the distortion patterns, claimed the signal carried traces of energy unknown to imperial science, radiant, harmonic, and impossibly pure. But the file was sealed, labeled Saiyan, Contagion, and buried beneath faults of redacted liturgies. There were worlds where cults rose in his name, mistaking his serenity for salvation. They painted the imperial Aquila with golden halos of key flame, worshipping the fusion of man and divinity as the next evolution of faith. To the ecclesiarch, this was blasphemy, yet secretly, even the priests hesitated when they looked upon his carved effigies. There was no corruption in that face, no arrogance, only calm, as though the universe itself had been forgiven, if only for a moment. But forgiveness has no place in the 41st millennium. The Adeptus Custodes issued silent decrees. Any mention of the Crimson Saiyan was to be erased, any relic destroyed, any follower purged. And yet, on the farthest edge of Segmentum Obscurus, in a system thought lifeless, an imperial probe captured an impossible image. A single figure, suspended above a dying sun, hands folded as if in prayer. Energy danced around him in spirals. Of crimson and gold, neither warp nor key, something older, something newer. The machine spirit that recorded it burned out moments later. Some said the gods turned away that day. Others whispered they learned fear, for if one mortal could wield their essence and remain unbroken, then perhaps the divine were not eternal after all. The chaos pantheon raged, twisting the warp into storms of despair to erase his trace. But his will endured, not as a curse, but as a mirror, a reflection of what could be if choice triumphed over corruption. The galaxy moved on. Wars raged. Empires fell. But in the quiet between stars, something lingers, a warmth that refuses to die like the last breath of a star before it collapses into light. And somewhere within the endless silence, the Saiyan's voice drifts through the void, neither a roar nor a whisper, but something in between. Even gods can break, if they forget why they began. And with that echo, the light fades, leaving only a smile carved across eternity, one that even the immaterium dares not touch. The warp did not move, it recoiled, its storms froze. Mid-howl, its endless tendrils of madness curling inward like wounded serpents retreating from fire. For the first time since the birth of chaos, the immaterium found itself ruled not by emotion, but by presence. The red sun, as the scribes of the Ordo Chronos would later call him, shone not as light, but as truth. His form rippled between matter and memory, each breath bending the tides of unreality, forcing even the oldest demons to kneel or vanish. It was not dominance born of hatred, nor of ambition, but of absolute clarity. Goku, if that name still belonged to him, had ceased to struggle against the warp. He simply existed, and that existence alone was unbearable to everything around him. Every world connected to the Empyrean felt the echo. On Terra, the Astronomicon flickered just once, as if blinking in disbelief. Navigators across the Segmentum Solar collapsed, their third eyes weeping molten light. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared it a solar anomaly. The Ecclesiarchy called it a sign of divine wrath. But to the few inquisitors who still dared to think beyond dogma, it was something far worse, the dawn of independence within the warp. For if a single will could command it, even for a heartbeat, what did that mean for the Emperor's dominion? Goku drifted through the screaming tides, his aura leaving trails of calm where madness once bloomed. Fragments of worlds, long consumed by demonic corruption, flared back into fragile being as his energy brushed them. Ghost cities reappeared, their ruins glimmering with momentary light before fading again, echoes of redemption that the materium could not yet comprehend. He did not speak. He did not need to. Every motion of his spirit was a language the warp had forgotten. Discipline in the deepest abyss. The four gods gathered, though together was a word without meaning in that place. Korn raged first, his brass world shattering mountains in protest. He denies blood its song, the war god thundered. He brings stillness where there should be war. Slanesh's laughter slithered through the silence, brittle and uncertain. He feels no desire, no hunger. He robs me of perfection. Nurgle wept, but his tears birthed no life this time. He rejects decay. What joy is there in something that cannot die? And Tezinj. He only watched, eyes within eyes flickering like dying stars. He is not defiance, the changer murmured. He is understanding. The immaterium trembled at that word. Understanding, a concept anathema to the warp, which thrived only on contradiction. Goku's power did not bend the laws of chaos. It reminded the warp of the order it had once fled from, of creation before corruption, and so it resisted him, not with fury, but with terror. Planets long erased from imperial charts began to whisper back through the void, their VOX signals faint but clear, carrying a single symbol burned into their transmissions, a crimson halo, burning like a sun. In the Manufactoria of Mars, the Fabricator General ordered a purge of every record containing that symbol. Yet, in secret, a faction of the Magi biologists began experiments, tracing the frequencies left in the ether. They claimed the energy had structure, that it obeyed no known equation of warp resonance. Some even called it ki, though the word was swiftly banned, struck from every cogitator by decree of the Mechanicus conclave. Still, the rumor spread. The red sun was not a god. He was proof that something outside the warp could exist within it. Within the silent ocean, Goku hovered at the edge of a rift where reality thinned to nothing. His eyes were closed, his form flickering between flame and flesh. Around him, shards of broken dreams, worlds unborn, hopes unfulfilled, orbited like dust around a dying star. Somewhere, deep within his fading humanity, he could still feel it, the memory of air, the taste of rain, the sound of laughter on a quiet earth that no longer remembered him. He reached toward that memory, but the light refused to follow. The warp tugged at him, whispering in every tongue there ever was, "Stay, you are needed." And for the briefest moment, the red sun hesitated, his aura dimmed, the silence deepened. The warp, the entire, infinite, screaming sea of it, leaned closer. A single word passed his lips, not in rage, not in sorrow, but in peace, "No." And with that, the stillness shattered. The demonic worlds bent before him like glass beneath a hammer. Mountains of bone and rivers of molten ichor reformed at his passing, molded by will alone. The red sun did not command the warp through violence, he defined it. Where his key brushed against the sea of unreality, corruption restructured into perfect symmetry. The air itself shimmered, rippling between substance and spirit, forming palaces of crimson flame that stretched across eternity. Demons knelt, not because they chose to, but because their existence demanded it. They were reflections now, shadows cast by his light. In the heart of this dominion rose the citadel of silence, a vast structure suspended between time and thought, built from the remains of slain gods and half-remembered prayers. Every surface burned with radiant sigils written in his aura, glowing with the rhythm of a living star. It was there that the demon primarchs came, drawn by instinct more than loyalty. Angron, his chains fused into living fire, crawled upon his knees until his flesh turned to ash. Fulgrim, once the serpent of perfection, tore out his own eyes so he might never gaze upon another beauty again. Mortarion approached and turned away without a word, his scythe dissolving into dust before the red sun's presence. And from the shifting winds of deceit came Magnus the Red. The last two kneel, not in fear, but recognition. "You are what they promised," he whispered, "and what we were too weak to become." But even as the Immaterium knelt, Goku did not speak. His face held no pride, no triumph. The fire that surrounded him burned without heat. The silence that followed was absolute. Across the warp, the laughter of the gods faltered, replaced by something hollow or laced with terror. For in creating their perfect champion, they had unknowingly forged their own undoing. Yet within that perfection, a fracture formed. A tremor, faint but real. It began as a thought, not of war or conquest, but of before. The scent of earth's wind, the warmth of sunlight untainted by the screams of souls. A child's laughter echoing through fields of green. A memory that should have been lost to the abyss. And then, within that stillness, a voice, soft, human, calling a name he had long forgotten. Goku, the sound pierced deeper than any blade. His aura flickered, the crimson glow dimmed, pulsing like a dying sun. The throne beneath him, a construct of divine energy and defiance, cracked down. The middle with a sound like the splitting of worlds. The warp recoiled, sensing weakness, sensing change. For the first time since his ascension, the red sun hesitated. His gaze turned inward, past the godhood, past the boundless rage and victory, searching for something fragile that still refused to die. The demon primarchs froze, watching the impossible. Their master, their unmaker, faltering. Around them, the citadel groaned as its architecture began to unravel. Flames bled from stone. The air turned heavy, thick with the scent of burnt stars and ozone. Magnus spoke again, desperation tainting his voice. "You cannot look back," he warned. "The warp devours memory. To remember is to fall." But Goku did not answer. His hand clenched at his chest, and for a heartbeat, his form shimmered. Not divine, not monstrous, but human. The red sun was dying, replaced by the echo of the Saiyan who once fought for life, not dominion. Around him, the warp wailed like a living thing denied its master. The thrones of the gods shook upon their foundations, cracks running through their endless empires of sin, and in that chaos, the warp's infinite chorus began to scream his name, not in worship, but in fear. Because if a god could remember being mortal, what else might he remember next? A whisper echoed across eternity, trembling through every plane of existence. The red sun had turned his gaze homeward, and the warp began to burn. The warp had never known silence. Even in its chaos, even in its unending shrieks and the birth of new horrors, there was always sound. But now there was nothing. The immaterium held its breath, as if the universe itself waited to see what he would choose. The red sun, once the conqueror of gods, stood alone at the center of creation's wound. His aura no longer screamed, it whispered. His light was no longer war, it was remembrance. Every spark that left his body shimmered like memory, burning brighter as it died. He looked upon the empire he had built, upon the thrones shattered by his own hesitation, and saw the truth that none of the chaos gods ever could. Power without meaning is a cage without walls. His dominion stretched across infinite plains, yet none of it felt alive. The demons knelt, their faces twisted in silent worship, waiting for a command that would never come. Even Khorne's blood-soaked realm lay still, its rivers hardened into obsidian under the heat of his ki. For the first time since the dawn of the warp, there was no war. Only stillness. Only him. Gok. You closed his eyes and saw everything. He saw the echo of his world, of Earth, distant and fragile beneath the shadow of forgotten stars. He saw his son, Gohan, laughing beside the ruins of a home rebuilt too many times. He saw Chikai's anger, her voice sharp but alive, a sound he would give eternity to hear again. He saw Vegeta, unbowed even in death, smiling that defiant, proud smile that had once driven him forward. Every face, every battle, every loss he had buried beneath divinity surged back like the rush of breath before the first cry of life. And for the first time in ages, he felt. The warp trembled. The demon Primarchs screamed as cracks spread through the red sun's body, not from weakness, but will. His aura, once a constant blaze, began to collapse inward, folding upon itself like a dying star. Power screamed around him, desperate to survive, desperate to cling to its vessel. But Goku had made his choice. His divinity had been born from defiance and, so it would end the same way. He raised his hands, and the crimson light that had terrified gods gathered between his palms. The immaterium howled. Worlds of madness began to unmake themselves, burning away into pure thought. The palaces of Slaanesh melted into song and vanished. Nurgle's gardens turned to dust beneath the weight of purity. Even Zensh's shifting towers froze mid-change, their futures erased in a single moment of final clarity. Across the materium, warp storms fell silent. Fleets lost to madness reappeared adrift in calm space, their crews weeping as they felt sunlight on their faces for the first time in centuries. The red sun looked to the endless dark, to the stars that had once been his heaven and his exile, and smiled not the smile of a god, but of a man. The same man who had once stood against tyrants, not because he wanted to win, but because he refused to yield. The same man who had once believed that strength was meant to protect, not to rule. "No more," he whispered. The sound was small, fragile, yet it carried through eternity. Then, with a roar that shook both realms, Goku released everything. Every ounce of ki, every drop of divine essence, every thread of fury and love he had carried through life and death. It tore through the warp like the first dawn, pure and unstoppable. Light consumed shadow, but not with hatred, with mercy. The demon empires he had forged crumbled, collapsing into the very fabric they had defied. The warp screamed his name until it could no longer speak, and when it was done, there was no explosion, no destruction, no lead release. A single breath escaped him, and the cosmos exhaled in return. The red sun flickered once more and was gone. For a generation, the warp lay still. No storms, no whispers, no gods. Across the Imperium, astropaths awoke in the night, weeping, their skin warm as if touched by unseen light. They spoke of a presence, fleeting but kind, brushing against their souls like the memory of sunlight through smoke. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy. The people called it hope. And somewhere beyond the reach of the Astronomicon, far past the scars of reality, a faint glow endures a red sun, burning quietly in the dark, neither holy nor damned, simply eternal.